Okay, we'll now move to the next part of the session 2. That was a really great session. And the second session we've got this morning is hydrogen markets. And our first presenter is Luigi Bonadio, Director Luigi Bonadio and Associates. Luigi is a Melbourne-based chemical engineer with 30 years of local and international research and development and engineering experience on energy solutions for a broad range of government and corporate clients operating across transport, commercial, industrial, and manufacturing sectors. He's a recognized leader in the global hydrogen industry with broad knowledge of hydrogen technologies and market. He conducted research and development into renewable hydrogen and hydrogen storage systems at the universities of Melbourne, Florida, and Milan in the early 1990s, and has served as a technical and commercial advisor to many government departments. He is Engineers Australia's representative on Standards Australia's ME093 Hydrogen Technologies Committee. He's a member of the Australian Institute of Energy Melbourne Branch Committee, was secretary of the 17th World Hydrogen Energy Conference 12 years ago in Brisbane in 2008. He's currently Principal Consultant Hydrogen for APAC at Jacobs, working on the feasibility assessment and design of hydrogen plants for various market applications. Welcome, Luigi. Look forward to your presentation.
Okay. Hello, everybody. What a fantastic opportunity to be contributing, and I should extend my gratitude to Priya and the organising committee, and welcome you all. Let's just hope we have a thorough discussion of a range of themes, and thank you for the introduction, Paul. I gather you can see my screen, but I'll run through my presentation slowly. So yes, I'm currently the director of my own consultancy, Luigi Bonadio and Associates. But just for clarification to the market, I am on contract to Jacobs in the Melbourne of Jacobs, and I serve in the role of principal and I do come with a fair bit of experience in hydrogen. It goes right back to about 1990, so a fair bit of work in R&D, and we've been able to provide services on the technical and commercial side. This is session 2, hydrogen markets. I'm just going to give a broad brush overview of opportunities and some barriers. And later on, I'm going to be the moderator of a Q&A panel looking at the transition of hydrogen into the commercial realm. So please feel free to raise questions through the course of the forum, and we'll do our best to address those questions and put them to the panel. And just on the panel, like I said, the theme is transitioning hydrogen into the commercial realm. So some of the things that you could be thinking about or ideas you may wish to raise is, what are the break-even price points such that markets can come to bear based on a delivered price of hydrogen? Other issues that we should be thinking about: what are the key drivers that support the commercialisation of hydrogen? Is it just purely economic, or are there non-economic considerations? What would be...
Sorry, Lou, I was just going to say, I don't think, I'm not sure if you're sharing your screen, but I can't see it, and I don't think the audience can either. So,
have you got it now? Hang on. You got it now?
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. Obviously, also the sources of investment's obviously very critical to the advancement of a hydrogen industry. What is the source of that investment? What would be the scale and the best timing for it? And I think another dot point's going to come up if I'm able to do this. Yes, and what are the economic instruments that would facilitate that investment? And sorry, I've got that around the wrong way, but I thought I'd add right at the onset, what are the industry sectors that are likely to find market, and what are the applications of hydrogen that will be viable? So that gives you a little bit of a backdrop as to what we might be discussing later today, and I'll touch on some aspects of this through the course of my presentation today. So let's move on. Session 2, markets. What are the markets? So let's break this down. Obviously, power generation is pivotal. be it hydrogen derived through fossil fuels such as natural gas and the reforming of natural gas, or the gasification of coal, or biological production. But what seems to be gathering a lot of emphasis is renewable hydrogen, that is hydrogen derived through the use of electrolyzers. There are a few other technologies in the embryonic stage as well that need to be considered for the purposes of supplying hydrogen and feeding it through a fuel cell to generate power. But it's not just limited to fuel cells, or the 6 different types of fuel cells that you can use to generate power. You could also use a dedicated hydrogen turbine. These are massive units in the order of 300 megawatts, 400 megawatts, which at this point in time, hydrogen's being used in combination with natural gas to generate power. But there is also work in the use of dedicated gas turbines based on hydrogen alone. The other sector that's gaining a fair bit of momentum in hydrogen is not so much focusing on the hydrogen use, although that's useful, but the production of electrolytic oxygen for the purposes of wastewater treatment. And there's a fair bit of reception from the majority of water authorities in Australia at this point in time about that co-location opportunity. What gets a fair bit of exposure are the transport applications for vehicles, different types of fuel cell electric vehicles, be it the light duty vehicle class or commercial vehicles. But what seems to be gathering most momentum and shows greatest viability is that heavy duty vehicle sector. And we're seeing a lot of new market entrants in that space, such as Nikola and Hyzon of late. So that's an exciting opportunity. By transport, we should also include the use of hydrogen as a substitute for natural gas in pipelines. And what's been heavily promoted as a long-term investment opportunity is the idea of Australia engaging in the bulk export of hydrogen to parts of Asia in particular. Hydrogen's been used for many, many years in regular industrial uses in petrochem and the like. But we're starting to see a fair bit of traction in the idea of using hydrogen from renewable energy sources for the purposes of chemical manufacture, such as ammonia and methanol and the like. So that's, I would regard for Australia, a near-term market opportunity once that price point is met. And then there's opportunities for that hydrogen that's being transported through pipelines to service our built environment requirements, be it in a domestic application or in a commercial building for heating and the like. So that's the broad overview of the market segments. It's going to be interesting just to see how receptive the Australian market is to this opportunity. And what really is driving it is the idea that hydrogen provides definitive environmental benefits, and that's part of the reason why I work in this area and many others, is we see the distinct advantage of not only being able to generate economic activity, but also address some pretty serious climate change impacts and also the air quality impacts of the continued use and reliance on petrochem fuels such as petrol and diesel. What is interesting is that in other jurisdictions, not here in Australia, but certainly other jurisdictions in Europe and the like, there are definitive regulatory targets to phase out internal combustion engines that are driven by through the use of petrol and diesel, and that is something that sets a target for to increase investment, particularly for transport applications of hydrogen. So it's something that we're monitoring very closely. And in the UK, there was a revision of bringing those dates forward. Not only those listed here, but electric vehicle targets have been set for a number of other jurisdictions. I just wish that Australia would adopt the same. In terms of the market analysis that's been done, and there's varied levels of detail that goes into the underlying economic analysis, I would encourage you to treat certain analyses with some caution. But the best analysis that I can bring to the table here and share with you is the work out of the Hydrogen Council that have written a very good and comprehensive work looking at cost perspectives. I think that report was released late last year. The Deloitte Ballard report, and I think that it was Ballard in China, and the Deloitte analysts came together to write a very good report. And some of the data that I'll share with you in a moment is sourced from that report. Report that provides market data on fuel cell sales and projections of it, comes out of an English consultancy called E4 Tech, a guy called David Hart that's been involved in the industry for many a year. Writes very good annual reports, so that's keep your eye on the data coming out of that. What's driving the rapid uptake of renewable hydrogen is obviously the reduced levelised cost of things, large-scale solar PV and wind plants, even though the levelised cost improvement is slowing. So it's approaching an asymptote, which is a little bit of concern to us and people working in hydrogen, because the hydrogen price itself directly correlates to the electricity price. And we're seeing renewables dropping in price to the point where it's much cheaper to be building a solar PV plant, or you're able to provide power at a lower levelised cost compared to conventional coal-fired power stations and gas ones. So although at this point in time we're seeing a cost competitiveness from solar and wind, that is slowing somewhat, but it doesn't by any stretch of the imagination hold back investment in renewable hydrogen. The point here being that renewable hydrogen, not too far into the future, will be able to provide hydrogen at a cost competitive point, and I'll elaborate on that in a moment. The value of the global market, although it's reasonably varied depending on who's doing the analysis, but what seems to be credible is in the figure of around $200 billion globally in a few years' time. So there's rapid escalation. I think the rate is in and around 8 to 10% annually. And that uptake is dominated in the Asia Pacific region, where there's a fair bit of emphasis in that transport sector, such that 35% of the market is invested in that region. And this is great for us Australians because we're in close proximity to those countries, and there's a massive opportunity to be exporting hydrogen to those net importers of their energy. We know countries such as Japan have pretty clear goals on setting a hydrogen future for their country. And Australia definitively has distinct advantages in its ability to produce hydrogen in large quantities and at a cost competitive point. So if we look at drivers and indicators for the groundswell of interest in hydrogen, there's a number of drivers. As I mentioned before, the benefits of reducing carbon intensity in the economy is very important. We're seeing those renewable hydrogen energy costs drop. And we also are very clearly aware of the great work governments in Australia at the state and federal level have done in the way of producing roadmaps and strategies. So the momentum's certainly there, and we're starting to observe greater industry alliances. And I'll just show some examples of this. And this was sourced from the Ballard report. And I think I'm one for greater collaboration and partnership, and we're this is evidenced through the collaborations of these corporates. One of the things that we're observing is reduced costs, and if you look at buses, which is a near-term market application, costs are being reduced by something like up to 60%, and it's being driven by innovation in technology and product development. And this is really important because later today we're going to be hearing from some of our better researchers that are doing making dedicated efforts to improve on costs and efficiencies of the technologies they're developing in hydrogen. A couple of guys from CSIRO doing some excellent work and have for a long period of time. We should promote innovation as much as we can and support our researchers, be they aligned with CSIRO or the many universities around Australia conducting hydrogen research. One interesting parameter to evaluate, particularly for the transport sector, is the total cost of ownership. Estimates indicate that hydrogen in certain jurisdictions for certain classes of vehicles will show a cost benefit compared to battery electric equivalents or the conventional internal combustion engines. I'll run through those in a moment for two different jurisdictions. And a company called Ballard Power Systems, very proactive in fuel cell manufacture, is expecting fuel cell systems to continue to drop by up to 75%. So if we look, if you consider by analogy the cost reduction in solar technology over the years, we would anticipate electrolyzers and fuel cell systems to drop by in a similar way. The more installed capacity, the reduced capital expenditure. So let's look at some cases of break-even points for fuel cell electric vehicles. And in this instance, this is for Europe, across the European Union, as an average across different countries, and the best available data after many months of analysis. This report, this data being presented, came out of the Hydrogen Council's analysis, and we can see here that break-even point in a European context is roughly around 2023, which is only 3 or 4 years away from now, of course. I see great momentum. In fact, last night in the International Partnership for the Hydrogen Economy ran an event where ministers and other leading players in the European Union were talking about the massive amounts of investment going to be directed to further research and to generate more investment in this area, in hydrogen vehicles in particular. And this graph that I'm presenting perhaps indicates why. There's been a fair bit of speculation about what hydrogen's role in transport might be moving forward, but I can assure you that there's a great high level of confidence and activity being directed to hydrogen in Europe. In fact, I think there's a new line of trucks coming out of Europe, which no doubt you'll hear about in due course. If we consider the analysis in the US, it's a little bit longer period before we see that break-even point, but not too far away. And there's a fair bit of excitement and momentum being built up in the US on the back of what the Nikola Motor Company is doing in terms of production of heavy-duty trucks. And I'll just repeat that trucks is a near-term market for hydrogen investment in Europe, in the US, and worldwide. So this is just an idea of projection of break-even point for transport, but we could do the same analysis for other applications and other markets. I just wanted to share with you today my views on what's happening in transport in particular, and one of the areas where there's a great level of activity outside of Europe and in the US, and as I've mentioned, a fair bit of activity in APAC is driven out of China. And this gives you some idea of vehicles on the road already in operation. So sometimes it might not be articulated or shared or disseminated, but the levels of investment in China is quite outstanding. And this gives you an indication of what China is doing across different regions in China. I would anticipate, I know there's a fair level of interest in Australia in doing pilot plants. I think that there's a project out of Sydney to have 100 electric buses in operation pretty soon, and the Q fleet vehicles in Queensland being run off fuel cell electric drivetrain in Brisbane. So that's pretty exciting. There's a renewable hydrogen pilot plant being developed in the Old Bulwer Island refinery in Brisbane. There's talk of a hydrogen highway of trucks in WA and a few others, which I can't disclose with you at this point. But the momentum's good. This is all very exciting. A lot of people would think that the transport sector is going to be lead the way, and that other applications may stem from that. I don't necessarily share that view. I think Australia's a unique market. We're working on a 10 megawatt electrolyser at the moment. I can't disclose where that is, but I can tell you that there's going to be some large-scale electrolysers in operation across Australia very soon. I wanted to cover today. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to go into much detail given the allocation of time. But like I've said, with the Q&A panel session later today, we'll be able to elaborate a little bit more about what the opportunities might be for Australia and what the barriers are. So I'll just run through those points. So feel free to ask any questions and raise them either now or through the course of the forum. So at that point, thank you for the opportunity to be presenting and part of this forum. Thank you, Priya and Paul and the rest of the speakers and panellists. I hope that you enjoy the forum, and if anybody wants to get in touch with me to ask any specific questions, I'm very responsive, and there's my email, Luigi Bonadio at jacobs.com. So at this point, Paul, I'll hand back to you if I can.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Luigi. That's really been a fantastic presentation. And I think one of the things, and we're sort of running right on time, Luigi. So what I might do is, because you're chairing the session later this afternoon, I think you'll get an opportunity to add some comments and answer some questions there. I think one of the things is that you really bring to this is a very deep and long-term understanding of hydrogen. A question I won't ask you now, but a question I'd love you to perhaps think about and answer maybe in your opening remarks for the panel session later is, 12 years ago, the conference in Brisbane, what's different now about hydrogen? So don't answer it now, because we'll move on to our next speaker, but what's different now for those of us that are much newer to the hydrogen sector? What's new, and potentially what does that mean in terms of confidence in the way forward? So, but look, thank you very much, Luigi.